no obstruction. He said we can't prove the negative because there's too much evidence for that, and we can't charge him because the Justice Department won't let us charge him, so we're not going to look for that evidence. We have to hear from Barr, we have to hear from Mueller, we have to hear from other people like Don McGahn, whom we're going to call. We have to get the entire report, including the redacted materials, so we can evaluate it.
House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler has issued a subpoena for the full Mueller report, requesting that Attorney General William Barr turn it over by May 1st. Now, this shows Democrats picking up the ball the special counsel threw in their court when he wrote, quote, "With respect to whether the president can be found to have obstructed justice by exercising his powers under Article 2 of the Constitution, we concluded that Congress has authority to prohibit a president's corrupt use of his authority in order to protect the integrity of the administration of justice." So on that, we're going to bring in our legal panel. Doug Burns is here. He's a former federal prosecutor and trial attorney. Rachel M. Self is here as well. Happy Easter to both of you, and I'm happy to see you both.
Happy Easter.
Thank you. Rachel, I'll start with you. Hey, Doug. Rachel, would the Democrats be better served to not rush to the altar of impeachment, but wait to hear public testimony from Mr. Mueller and Don McGahn, former White House counsel?
Absolutely. I think a rush to judgment for impeachment here at this point would be premature. I think that to impeach in order to access the redacted report would be a nuclear option, and I think that the Democrats could really cut off the nose to spite the face here if they're not careful.
Doug, what do you think?
Well, it's a tricky calculus. I mean, you went from sort of law issue number one to law issue number two. Law issue one was you had a special counsel who was hired, engaged to determine whether or not there should be a criminal prosecution. The answer, despite all the kicking and screaming, was no prosecution is recommended for either collusion or coordination. But you know he wasn't going to, the special counsel wasn't going to recommend prosecution. Well, we weren't sure about that, honestly. And the point is, everybody was saying the only reason why it wasn't done is because Donald Trump's president. Well, then the first question logically from any lawyer is why, let me just finish, why weren't anybody else around him indicted, okay? So the point is, now you move into impeachment, which is a totally different discussion. Impeachment is based on the language high crimes and misdemeanors, created 230 plus years ago, and it's a political question.
But I don't think it is a political question, right? Because if there really was a criminal act, Congress would have the authority to move for impeachment proceedings. But in this situation, I think that what's going on here is everybody's realizing what really makes sense here and what's best for the country. And really the mechanism for this to flesh out is in the court system. Courts deal every day. And Doug, you and I know if we were against each other in a court case, I wouldn't simply trust that what your redactions were would work for me. We would have a judge determine issues of privilege, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. And I think just more information is needed here before we rush to judgment on this. Mr. Mueller is, in my opinion, unimpeachable. I think that he's a true patriot. I think that he did his job here.
Rachel, and what would you want to hear from Mr. Mueller and Don McGahn in their testimonies?
Well, again, going back to something that Doug and I have discussed before, I think that to hear from Mr. Mueller is going to be a complex issue as well. But I would want to hear from him because there's going to be legal issues as to how to get his testimony. But what I would want to hear is how he reached this conclusion and what are the things, although his report was very thorough, what are the things that made him, did he truly determine, and I'd want to flesh out, did he truly determine that the only reason why he wasn't charging here was because he believed it was only Congress's authority to get involved in this, or did he think that there really wasn't enough evidence to move forward with the obstruction charge? But in the grand scheme of things, I think that the more important issue is whether or not it makes sense for the good of the country to really continue to get bogged down in this issue. This is something we could choose to talk about for the next year and a half, or we could start to move forward and focus on the future. And I think that's really what we need to do rather than continue to play the broken record over and over and over again of something that at this point has been thoroughly investigated by somebody incredibly trustworthy.
Most Americans they're tired of hearing about it. Doug, you're a former federal prosecutor. What would you want to hear? What would you want to ask Mr. McGahn or Mr. Mueller?
Absolutely nothing, and I know I'm being a little sarcastic. I'm a purist, Arthel. In my 33 years, 9 as an assistant U.S. attorney and the balance as a defense lawyer, every single time a case was declined, The folder was closed, and it was put in the file cabinet. Nothing more was said about the case, and we all moved on to the next case. So the point is, I'm absolutely dead set. This is like saying, let's revisit who won the Super Bowl.
But that was under different circumstances. This makes these circumstances are unique in that this investigation was about a president or a presidential campaign, and perhaps how the president operates in office.
You see, I love the way you put that, Arthel, because you just recognized, and you're so right, that unfortunately the criminal procedure process was just infected, overshadowed by the politics of it, honestly.
Well, and I think the thing is, too, I think that you need to look at the fact that with regard to Mr. Mueller, it's not a situation of the fox guarding the hen house, right? I mean, he was independently assigned with a particular objective at hand, and he did his job. He did his job. So I think that to now say, okay, well, now we want to see whether or not his job was the right job, and, you know, I mean, I feel like it's just really getting bogged down in things that at this point, I think that we need to not rush to further judgment, and if Congress determines they want more information, take it one step at a time. But to start impeachment proceedings now, at this stage, after the information that we have out of that report, it would be nuclear, I think, at this point. I think that it could really do damage to the Democratic Party to choose to do that now. I think that they should focus on the future and the 2020 election.
Got to go. I'd imagine Doug agrees with you on that one. Democrats should just drop it.
I do.
See, I knew that. All right, Doug Burns and Rachel Self, happy Easter to both of you. Thanks, guys.
Happy Easter. Nice to see you guys. Take care.
Likewise.
Wow.